Mrs. Whitmore, the security guard asked quietly as he stepped in front of the maternity ward doors. Your daughter-in-law only authorized immediate family. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. The automatic doors slid open behind him, letting out the soft scent of hospital disinfectant and warm cafeteria coffee, and somewhere down the hall, a newborn baby cried. My grandson. My first grandson. I tightened my fingers around the blue gift bag hanging from my wrist. Inside was the hand-knitted blanket I had spent 3 months making, pale blue with tiny white stars stitched carefully into the corners while sitting alone in my kitchen every evening. There must be some mistake, I said softly. My son is Daniel Whitmore. Vanessa is my daughter-in-law. The guard shifted uncomfortably. He looked about 30, maybe younger than Daniel, with tired eyes and a wedding ring that caught the fluorescent lights overhead. I'm sorry, ma'am. She specifically requested that only immediate family be allowed into the room. Immediate family. The words landed harder than I expected. I stared past his shoulder through the narrow glass window beside the doors. Inside the maternity wing, people moved quietly through the bright hallway carrying flowers and balloons. Then I saw her. Vanessa's mother. Carol Bennett stood near the nurse's station holding my grandson wrapped in a striped hospital blanket, smiling proudly while Vanessa sat in a wheelchair beside her. Daniel stood behind them with one hand resting on Vanessa's shoulder. He looked exhausted but happy. Complete. Like a family portrait printed inside one of those expensive holiday cards people send in December. I waited for him to look up. Just once. But he didn't. Would you like me to call your son? The guard offered carefully. I swallowed the tightness in my throat and forced a polite smile instead. No, I said. I don't want to cause any trouble. My voice sounded calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that only comes when something inside you begins quietly breaking apart. I stepped away from the doors before anyone inside could notice me standing there like an unwanted visitor. The wheels of a passing hospital cart squeaked against the polished floor. Somewhere nearby, a television played a daytime talk show too loudly. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary people. Yet I suddenly felt invisible inside all of it. I walked slowly through the lobby clutching the gift bag against my chest. Near the elevators, a young father adjusted a tiny pink hat on his newborn daughter while his wife laughed softly beside him. Their happiness filled the room so naturally it almost hurt to stand near it. Outside, the November air cut through my coat immediately. Gray clouds hung low over the parking garage, and cold winds scattered dry leaves across the pavement. I sat inside my Buick for several minutes without turning the key. My hands rested on the steering wheel while the hospital entrance blurred slightly through my windshield. Then my phone buzzed. A new Facebook notification. Vanessa had posted a photo. 3 generations together, the caption read beside a small white heart. In the picture, Vanessa smiled from her hospital bed while her mother cradled my grandson beside her. Daniel leaned in close behind them. They looked warm. Connected. Complete. I stared at the screen for a long time before noticing the date stitched carefully into the corner of the blanket wrapped around my grandson. It wasn't the one I made. I drove home with the radio off and both hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The traffic outside St. Mary's Medical Center moved slowly beneath the gray afternoon sky, brake lights glowing red across the wet pavement as a light drizzle began falling over Portland. Normally, I loved November rain. My late husband used to joke that I found comfort in weather most people complained about. But that afternoon, every stoplight felt longer than usual, every passing minute heavier somehow. The blue gift bag rested untouched in the passenger seat beside me. Every now and then, the tissue paper shifted softly from the heat blowing through the vents, and each movement reminded me that my grandson had never received the blanket I made for him. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the rain had become steadier. Tiny drops rolled down the windshield while I sat there, staring at my house without moving. It was the same white colonial Daniel grew up in, with black shutters. I repainted myself every spring and the porch swing Richard built for me before he passed away 3 years ago. When Daniel was little, he used to race down those front steps every afternoon after school carrying his backpack half open, papers falling everywhere while he shouted about baseball practice or spelling tests or whatever excited him that day. Back then, I never imagined there would come a moment when I would sit in my own driveway afraid to walk inside because silence suddenly felt easier than reality. I finally carried the gift bag into the kitchen and set it carefully on the counter beside the ceramic cookie jar shaped like a lighthouse. The house smelled faintly like cinnamon candles and the chicken soup I had left simmering before driving to the hospital that morning. I had planned to bring containers of it to Daniel and Vanessa later that evening. Vanessa always claimed hospital food upset her stomach after surgery. I stood there looking at the pot for a long moment before quietly turning off the stove. The kitchen clock ticked steadily above the refrigerator. 4:23 in the afternoon. I realized then that Daniel still had not called me. Not after the security guard. Not after the Facebook photo. Not even a short text saying there had been some misunderstanding. I picked up my phone anyway and opened our family message thread. The last message from Daniel was 3 days earlier. Big day tomorrow. We are finally meeting our little guy. Underneath it, I had replied with 3 red heart emojis and a photo of the knitted blanket folded neatly across my lap. Vanessa never answered. I stared at the conversation for several seconds before locking my phone again. Maybe they were overwhelmed. Maybe Vanessa was exhausted after labor. Maybe Daniel was too distracted to realize what happened downstairs. I kept offering myself these little excuses because mothers do that. We smooth rough edges. We explain away coldness. We call cruelty stress and silence exhaustion because the alternative hurts too much. Around 6 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Again. For one hopeful second, I thought it might finally be Daniel. Instead, another Facebook notification appeared. Vanessa had uploaded more pictures. In one of them, her mother sat in the hospital recliner feeding Daniel takeout pasta from a plastic container while he smiled tiredly beside her. The caption read, "So grateful to have family surrounding us during this special moment." I looked at the screen until it dimmed in my hands. Then I quietly placed my phone face down on the kitchen table and noticed something strange for the first time. Daniel was still wearing the navy blue sweater I bought him last Christmas. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30 even though I had barely slept. Rain tapped softly against my bedroom windows while the sky outside remained dark and colorless. For years, I had kept the same morning routine. Coffee first. Then the local news playing quietly in the background while I watered the small herb garden above the kitchen sink. Richard used to tease me about that garden because I treated basil plants better than most people treated their pets. "You talk to those leaves more than you talk to me," he once joked while reading the Sunday paper at the table. The memory made me smile for exactly 2 seconds before the silence inside the house settled heavily around me again. I carried my coffee into the living room and sat beneath the framed family photos lining the fireplace mantel. There was Daniel at 8 years old wearing an oversized Little League uniform with missing front teeth and grass stains on both knees. Daniel at his college graduation with his arm wrapped proudly around Richard. Daniel dancing with me at his wedding while Vanessa smiled beside us in her white satin gown. I used to believe photographs preserved truth. Lately, they felt more like evidence of how quickly people could change while pretending they had not. Around 8 in the morning, my phone finally rang. Daniel's name appeared across the screen, and my chest tightened before I even answered. "Hi Mom," he said quickly. His voice sounded distracted, almost rushed, as if he had called during a commercial break instead of after becoming a father. "Sorry. Things were crazy yesterday." I stared out at the rain sliding down the windows. The security guard told me I was not authorized upstairs. Silence. Just for a second. But long enough. "Yeah," Daniel replied carefully. Vanessa wanted some quiet time after delivery. The nurses were limiting visitors. Visitors. The word landed strangely. I was not some distant neighbor dropping off flowers. I was his mother. His child's grandmother. But Daniel kept speaking before I could answer. You know how stressful labor was for her. I lowered my eyes toward the coffee table where Richard's reading glasses still rested beside an unfinished crossword puzzle from years ago. Her mother was there, I said softly. Another pause. Carol helped a lot during the pregnancy, Daniel explained. Vanessa just feels more comfortable with her. Comfortable. Immediate family. Visitors. Every sentence sounded polite enough on the surface. That was what made it worse. No yelling. No cruelty. Just careful little phrases designed to move me quietly farther away from the center of their lives. When can I meet him? I finally asked. I heard muffled movement on his side of the call. Then Vanessa's voice somewhere in the background. Low. Fast. Daniel cleared his throat afterward. Maybe give us a few days to settle in first. A few days. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course, I whispered. I understand. But after hanging up, I sat motionless on the couch holding my silent phone while a strange memory surfaced unexpectedly. 2 Christmases ago, Vanessa had changed dinner plans at the last minute because Carol needed more time with the family. Last Easter, she asked me not to post photos online before Carol had a chance to share hers first. During the baby shower, Vanessa introduced Carol to several guests as the world's best future grandma, while I stood 3 feet away arranging cupcakes on a dessert tray. At the time, I convinced myself none of it mattered. Tiny moments. Small oversights. But sitting there in the pale morning light, I realized something painful. None of this had started at the hospital. The hospital was simply the first time they stopped pretending I still belonged at all. 3 days passed before I heard from Vanessa directly. Not a phone call. Not even a text message. Just an email sent late Friday afternoon with the subject line, visitor schedule. I stared at those 2 words longer than necessary before opening it. The message itself was brief and strangely formal, almost like something sent by a dental office receptionist instead of family. Vanessa explained that because the baby needed consistency, they were limiting visits to approved time slots during the first few weeks. She attached a calendar with available openings highlighted in pale yellow. Tuesday from 4 to 4:30. Saturday from 11 to 11:45. No unplanned visits. No kissing the baby. No photos posted online without permission. At the bottom, she added a smiley face beside the sentence, "Thank you for respecting our boundaries during this special time." I read the email twice before quietly setting my laptop aside. Then I looked around my kitchen as if seeing it differently for the first time. On the counter sat the container of homemade chicken soup I never delivered. The blue knitted blanket still rested untouched inside the gift bag near the pantry door. Beside the refrigerator stood the antique wooden high chair Richard spent an entire summer restoring after finding it at an estate sale 20 years ago. He refinished every inch of it by hand because he used to say one day our grandchildren would sit there eating pancakes on Sunday mornings. Back then, Daniel was still in college. Life still felt open and warm and certain somehow. I made myself tea and carried it to the dining room where late afternoon sunlight stretched softly across the hardwood floors. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking wall clock above the china cabinet. Quiet had never bothered me before. Richard and I spent years enjoying peaceful afternoons together without needing constant conversation. But this silence felt different. It felt like being slowly removed from something while everyone else pretended nothing had changed. Around 6 o'clock, my phone buzzed with another Facebook notification. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Vanessa had uploaded a short video from the nursery. Carol stood beside the rocking chair holding my grandson while Daniel assembled a white bookshelf in the corner. Vanessa's voice laughed softly behind the camera. Look at Grandma already spoiling him, she said warmly. Grandma. Not Carol. Not her mother. Just Grandma. Hundreds of comments filled the post beneath little heart emojis and congratulations. He is lucky to have such an involved grandmother. Carol looks so natural with him. 3 generations of beautiful family. I scrolled slowly until one particular comment caught my eye. One of Vanessa's friends had written, "At least your mother is normal unlike some mothers-in-law." Vanessa replied with a laughing emoji. Nothing else. Just enough. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Not because strangers online mattered. But because silence can say things words never need to. I set my phone face down on the table again and walked toward the hallway closet where old family albums were stacked neatly on the top shelf. I pulled one down carefully and opened it on the dining room table. There was Daniel at age 5 sitting on my lap at Cannon Beach wrapped in a towel after running into freezing Pacific water. Daniel asleep against Richard's chest during a camping trip near Mount Hood. Daniel smiling beside me at his high school graduation while holding the watch I bought him with overtime pay from the accounting firm where I worked for nearly 20 years. Every page carried proof of a life built slowly and lovingly over decades. Yet somehow now, standing outside a hospital room and waiting for permission to visit my own grandson, I felt less like family and more like someone applying for temporary access to people I once believed were mine forever. The following Tuesday, I arrived exactly 10 minutes before my assigned visiting time. The sky above Portland was clear for the first time in days, pale winter sunlight reflecting softly against the hospital windows as I walked through the parking garage carrying a small paper bag filled with homemade blueberry muffins. I almost laughed at myself while riding the elevator upstairs. Even after everything, some part of me still wanted to arrive bearing gifts like mothers always do. The maternity floor looked quieter than before. Fewer balloons. Fewer visitors lingering in hallways. The same security guard from last week stood near the entrance desk, and I noticed the flicker of recognition in his expression when he saw me approaching. This time, he stepped aside immediately without asking questions. "You are cleared to go in, Mrs. Whitmore," he said gently. Cleared. Such an odd word for family. I thanked him anyway and walked slowly down the hallway toward room 214. My footsteps sounded strangely loud against the polished floors. When I reached the doorway, the first thing I noticed was Carol sitting comfortably in the recliner beside the window holding my grandson against her chest while Vanessa slept in bed nearby. Soft afternoon light spilled across the room, warming the pale yellow blanket draped over Carol's lap. She looked peaceful. Familiar. Like she belonged there naturally. Daniel stood near the counter pouring coffee into a paper cup when he noticed me. "Mom," he said quietly, sounding surprised even though he knew exactly when I was coming. He walked over and kissed my cheek quickly before glancing toward Vanessa as if checking whether she might wake up. "Hey sweetheart," I whispered. My eyes drifted immediately toward the baby. My grandson. Tiny wisps of dark hair curled above his forehead, and one small hand rested against Carol's sweater. He looked so impossibly small that my chest ached just looking at him. "He finally fell asleep," Carol said softly, rocking slightly in the chair. Poor thing was fussy all morning. There was no cruelty in her tone. That almost made it harder. She spoke with the easy confidence of someone who had already settled comfortably into a role I had barely been allowed to touch. Daniel cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mom brought muffins." "That is nice," Carol replied politely. Then she looked back down at the baby again. I stood there holding the paper bag while silence slowly filled the room around me. Finally, Daniel gestured toward the chair beside Vanessa's bed. "You can sit if you want." "You can sit." I lowered myself carefully into the chair and folded my hands together in my lap. No one offered me the baby. No one even seemed to notice that I had not held him once since entering the room. Instead, Daniel and Carol continued discussing feeding schedules and pediatric appointments while I listened quietly from across the room like a distant relative visiting out of obligation. After several minutes, Vanessa stirred awake beneath the blankets and blinked slowly toward me. "Oh," she murmured softly. "You are here. Not Margaret. Not Mom." Just a simple acknowledgement like someone noticing a package had arrived. I did not realize it was already Tuesday. Her voice remained calm and pleasant, but something underneath it felt carefully measured. "I brought muffins," I repeated quietly, placing the bag on the counter beside the sink. Vanessa smiled faintly without looking at them. That was thoughtful. Then she turned her attention immediately back toward Carol and the baby. I sat there another 20 minutes watching another woman rock my grandson while Daniel hovered protectively around them both. Every now and then, nurses entered smiling warmly at Carol and asking whether Grandma needed anything. Not once did anyone look at me when they said it. And somehow, the most painful part was realizing nobody in the room corrected them. By the second week, I started noticing how carefully everything around me had been rearranged. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone to openly accuse Vanessa of being cruel. Just small shifts. Tiny adjustments that slowly changed the shape of my place in the family until I barely recognized it anymore. Daniel called less often now, and when he did, the conversations felt rushed and strangely supervised. I could hear Vanessa moving around in the background almost every time. Cabinet doors closing. Water running. A television softly playing. Sometimes he lowered his voice before answering simple questions, as though ordinary conversation with his own mother suddenly required caution. One Thursday evening, I called to ask whether the baby was sleeping through the night yet. Daniel laughed softly and said, "Actually, Carol has been amazing with that. She showed us this swaddling trick that works every time." Carol again. Always Carol. I sat at my kitchen table tracing circles against the rim of my coffee mug while he spoke. "That is wonderful," I replied gently. And I meant it, at least partly. None of this was Carol's fault. She had not pushed me aside directly. She had simply stepped naturally into the empty space Vanessa created around me. The following Sunday, Daniel and Vanessa hosted a small family brunch at their house to celebrate bringing the baby home officially. I only learned about it because my neighbor Judith mentioned seeing photos online. "Your grandson is beautiful," she said warmly while we stood beside our mailboxes that afternoon. "I loved the picture of all of you together. All of you." I smiled politely despite the sudden tightness in my chest. "What picture?" Judith looked confused for half a second before opening Facebook on her phone. There they were gathered around a dining room table in Daniel's new house. Vanessa smiling beside the baby carrier. Carol cutting cinnamon rolls in the kitchen. Daniel pouring orange juice into glasses while football played quietly on the television behind him. Streamers hung over the fireplace reading, "Welcome Home Baby Oliver." My eyes moved carefully across every face in the photo before Judith quietly lowered her phone. I was not there. Not even mentioned. "Maybe it was last minute," she offered awkwardly. I nodded because kindness sometimes sounds like pretending not to notice humiliation happening right in front of you. That evening, I opened one of the old cedar boxes in my bedroom closet where Richard kept important papers before he died. Inside were tax records, life insurance documents, faded birthday cards, and the small camcorder tapes Richard used during Daniel's childhood. Beneath them sat a thick cream-colored folder labeled Family Trust in Richard's careful handwriting. I had not looked at it in years. We created the trust shortly after Daniel got married because Richard believed financial planning protected families from future conflict. "Money changes people," he used to say while balancing spreadsheets at the dining room table. "Even good people." I opened the folder slowly. Inside were investment records, property information, and instructions regarding future grandchildren. One paragraph caught my attention immediately. The Whitmore Family Education Trust would remain under my supervision until any future grandchild reached 18 years old. Richard had insisted on that clause personally because he trusted my judgment with long-term finances. I stared at the paperwork while the house around me remained completely silent. Then another memory surfaced unexpectedly. About 6 months before the baby was born, Vanessa had asked several oddly specific questions during dinner. Whether the trust still existed. Whether Richard left detailed instructions. Whether trustees could ever be changed. At the time, her curiosity seemed harmless. Practical even. But sitting alone beneath the soft yellow kitchen light that evening, I suddenly understood something that made my stomach turn cold. Vanessa had not only been replacing me emotionally. She had been preparing to remove me officially. 2 days later, Vanessa invited me over for lunch. The message arrived unexpectedly around 9 in the morning while I was folding laundry in the hallway. "Thought maybe you would like to spend some time with Oliver today," she wrote. No smiley face this time. No mention of scheduling restrictions or visitor windows. Just a short message that somehow felt more suspicious because of how normal it tried to sound. By noon, I was driving across town beneath clear blue skies with a container of homemade lasagna balanced carefully on the passenger seat beside me. Daniel and Vanessa lived in one of those newer suburban developments where every lawn looked professionally measured and every mailbox matched perfectly. Richard used to joke that neighborhoods like this reminded him of movie sets because everything appeared too polished to be fully real. When Vanessa opened the front door, she smiled warmly enough that for a brief moment I questioned whether I had imagined the distance growing between us these past weeks. "Margaret," she said pleasantly. "Come in." The house smelled faintly of vanilla candles and fresh laundry. Somewhere upstairs, a baby monitor hummed softly through static. I stepped inside carrying the lasagna dish while Vanessa adjusted the sleeve of her cream-colored sweater. "You did not have to bring food," she said. "Carol already stocked our freezer." Of course she had. I smiled anyway and followed Vanessa into the kitchen where sunlight poured across bright marble countertops and untouched decorative cookbooks arranged neatly beside the stove. Everything looked beautiful in the careful, expensive way magazines often do. But it did not feel lived in yet. It felt staged. Daniel appeared a few minutes later carrying Oliver against his shoulder. My grandson wore a pale green sleeper with tiny bears stitched near the feet, and his dark hair curled slightly at the edges now. For the first time since his birth, Daniel finally walked directly toward me instead of around me. "Want to hold him?" he asked casually. The question caught me so off guard that my chest tightened instantly. "Yes," I whispered. Daniel carefully transferred Oliver into my arms, and the weight of him settled against me with heartbreaking familiarity. Warm. Small. Real. One tiny hand stretched sleepily against my sweater while his breathing moved softly beneath the blanket. Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes, but I blinked them away before anyone noticed. "He likes calm energy," Vanessa commented while pouring iced tea into tall glasses beside the sink. "Babies can sense tension." The remark sounded innocent enough on the surface. Yet something about the way she said tension made me look up immediately. Vanessa met my eyes for only half a second before glancing away again. During lunch, the conversation remained polite and strangely careful. Daniel talked about returning to work part-time next month. Vanessa described sleep schedules and pediatric checkups while occasionally correcting small details Daniel mentioned. Every now and then, she watched me holding Oliver with an expression I could not fully read. Not anger exactly. More like calculation. Halfway through the meal, Vanessa finally set down her fork and folded her hands together on the table. "Actually," she began lightly. "There is something Daniel and I wanted to ask you about." I felt Daniel stiffen slightly beside her. Vanessa continued smiling. "We were reviewing some financial planning paperwork for Oliver's future and realized the family trust is still structured under older terms." There it was. Quiet. Smooth. Almost rehearsed. Daniel avoided my eyes entirely now, focusing instead on cutting pieces of lasagna into smaller bites he never actually ate. We just think it might make more sense for everything to be updated, Vanessa explained carefully. You know, simplify responsibilities moving forward. I looked down at Oliver sleeping peacefully against my chest while sunlight flickered softly across the dining room table. Then I finally understood why today suddenly included warmth and invitations and smiles. It was not reconciliation they wanted. It was access. I kept my expression calm while Vanessa spoke about simplifying responsibilities and modernizing financial structures as though she were discussing landscaping estimates instead of my late husband's life work. Oliver stirred softly against my chest, his tiny fingers curling briefly around the fabric of my sweater before relaxing again. Daniel still would not look directly at me. Outside the dining room windows, afternoon sunlight stretched across the perfectly trimmed backyard while a neighbor pushed a stroller slowly down the sidewalk beyond the fence line. Everything appeared peaceful. That was the strange thing about betrayal. Most of the time, it arrived wearing polite smiles and offering iced tea. What exactly are you asking? I said quietly. Vanessa exchanged a quick glance with Daniel before answering. Well, the current trust arrangement is outdated. We were thinking it would be easier if Daniel became the primary trustee moving forward. Easier. Another soft little word designed to disguise something sharper underneath. I nodded slowly as if considering the idea seriously. I see. Daniel finally cleared his throat. Mom, nobody is trying to take anything away from you. The sentence hung awkwardly in the room because the moment someone says that, part of you already knows they are. Vanessa leaned back slightly in her chair and folded one leg neatly over the other. It is really about reducing unnecessary complications for Oliver's future. I lowered my eyes toward my grandson again. He looked impossibly peaceful sleeping there against me, completely unaware of the quiet negotiations already unfolding around his life before he was even old enough to hold his own head up properly. Richard used to warn me about moments like this. Not specifically this situation, of course. But the slow shift that happens when people stop seeing family as relationships and start seeing them as positions. Useful. Inconvenient. Replaceable. Richard trusted me with those responsibilities for a reason, I said gently. Vanessa smiled again, though this time it looked thinner somehow. Of course. And no one doubts your intentions. Intentions. Another careful word. Daniel reached for his glass of water without speaking. His silence no longer surprised me now. That was the painful clarity settling into place these past weeks. Vanessa may have orchestrated the distance, but Daniel allowed it to happen because comfort had become more important to him than courage. A soft chime suddenly echoed from upstairs through the baby monitor beside the kitchen counter. Vanessa stood immediately. I should probably change him. Her voice shifted warmer now, almost relieved to escape the conversation for a moment. She carefully lifted Oliver from my arms without asking whether I wanted another minute holding him first. The emptiness left behind against my chest felt colder than it should have. Daniel remained seated after Vanessa disappeared upstairs. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he rubbed one hand tiredly across his jaw and exhaled slowly. Mom, Vanessa just wants stability for the baby. I looked at my son sitting across from me at that expensive dining table wearing the same navy sweater I bought him last Christmas. The sleeves were slightly stretched near the wrists because he always pushed them up while working. Tiny details mothers notice automatically. Even when their children stop noticing them back. Do you remember what Vanessa wrote at the hospital? I asked softly. Daniel frowned slightly. What do you mean? Immediate family only. His eyes shifted downward instantly. There it was again. Silence. Not confusion. Not disagreement. Just silence. I stood slowly and reached for my coat draped over the back of the chair. I think I should head home before traffic gets worse, I said calmly. Daniel rose halfway from his seat as though he wanted to stop me, but he did not. Upstairs, I could hear Vanessa humming softly to Oliver through the baby monitor speaker while dresser drawers opened and closed in the nursery. The sound followed me all the way to the front door. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I realized something with complete certainty for the first time. They still needed me connected to the family legally. They just no longer wanted me connected emotionally. 3 weeks later, Daniel asked me to meet them at a small attorney's office downtown. He tried to make the invitation sound casual over the phone. Just some paperwork updates, he explained quickly. Nothing major. Outside, December rain covered Portland in a cold silver haze while traffic crawled slowly along Burnside Street. I parked beside the law office and sat in my car for a moment watching people hurry past carrying umbrellas and paper coffee cups. Across the street, Christmas lights already glowed softly in the windows of a bakery Richard used to love. Every year he bought peppermint bark there on Christmas Eve even though it cost twice as much as grocery store candy. Some traditions deserve quality, he always said. I carried that thought with me as I walked into the office lobby wearing my navy wool coat and pearl earrings Richard gave me on our 30th anniversary. Vanessa greeted me first. She looked polished as always in a cream cashmere sweater with her blonde hair perfectly curled around her shoulders. Daniel stood beside her holding Oliver's car seat while checking emails on his phone. Even here, he looked distracted. Tired. Like someone constantly trying to avoid conflict by pretending it does not exist. Margaret, Vanessa said warmly. Thank you again for coming. Her kindness sounded smoother lately, almost practiced. The attorney led us into a conference room with dark wood furniture and large windows overlooking the rainy street below. A stack of papers waited neatly arranged beside legal pads and bottled water. I recognized several trust documents immediately. Vanessa folded her hands carefully on the table. We really appreciate your flexibility with all this, she said. We just want to make sure Oliver's future stays simple and protected. Protected. Another carefully chosen word. The attorney began reviewing proposed changes to the trust structure while Daniel nodded silently beside him. Most of the revisions transferred authority gradually away from me and directly toward Daniel over time. Nothing aggressive. Nothing obvious. Just enough to slowly make me unnecessary. I listened quietly until the attorney finally paused and slid a signature page toward me across the polished table. Whenever you feel comfortable, he said politely. The room grew very still then. Rain tapped softly against the windows while somewhere down the hallway a copier hummed faintly. Vanessa smiled patiently across from me. Daniel adjusted Oliver's blanket without looking up. I rested my fingers lightly against the papers but did not pick up the pen. Instead, I looked toward Daniel first. Do you remember the hospital? I asked softly. His shoulders stiffened instantly. Vanessa's expression barely changed at all. Margaret, she began carefully, I really do not think revisiting hurt feelings is productive right now. Hurt feelings. Such a small phrase for something that changed everything. I turned toward her calmly. A security guard stopped me from meeting my grandson because you decided I was not immediate family. Neither of them spoke. I continued quietly. Then suddenly, the moment trust documents became important, I was family again. Daniel finally looked up then, and for the first time in weeks, shame flickered openly across his face. Real shame. Not defensiveness. Not avoidance. Just the painful realization of hearing truth spoken aloud without anger softening it. Vanessa sat straighter in her chair. That is unfair, she replied coolly. We were trying to establish healthy boundaries as new parents. I nodded slowly. Healthy boundaries do not usually require replacing someone. Silence settled heavily over the room. Even the attorney looked uncomfortable now. I closed the folder gently and slid it back across the table untouched. Richard trusted me to protect this family, I said quietly. And I intend to honor that responsibility exactly the way he asked me to. Then I stood, adjusted my coat sleeve, and walked calmly toward the door. Behind me, nobody tried to stop me. Months later, on a cold February afternoon, I sat alone with Oliver asleep against my chest beside the window in my living room while snow drifted softly across the backyard. Daniel had started visiting quietly on Sunday mornings now, usually without Vanessa. We spoke carefully with each other these days, like people rebuilding something fragile after finally admitting it had been broken all along. I looked down at my grandson's peaceful face and gently brushed one finger across his tiny hand. The day they stopped me outside that hospital room, they thought they were deciding who counted as family. What they never understood was that real family is not measured by access, titles, or carefully managed photographs online. It is measured by who still chooses to love quietly even after being given every reason not to.